Audioversity, the voice of Reichman University.
כל האוניברסיטה אודיוורסיטי.
Nobody holds a monopoly on the truth. When you go to the settlements, you hear important information and facts and ideas, and if you're not listening, you're losing a part of the truth. If you're not going to the Arab towns of Israel and listen to the Arabs of Israel, you are losing part of reality in Israel. You are blind. And if you're not listening to the leftists and so on, people here stop listening to each other, but the truth lies with the voice of everyone around the table. And to explain blindness and how dangerous it is, we just need to look at October 7th.
Welcome to Raw, a podcast where we confront the complexities of war from the inside out. I'm Anouk, a journalist, author, yoga teacher, and meditation practitioner. Raw, or war spelled backwards, symbolizes how many of us feel in the face of the Israel-Gaza conflict: exposed, vulnerable, and seeking understanding. Here, we don't just discuss the external battles, but dive deep into our internal struggles, examining how this violence has shaken our very core. Join me in conversations with philosophers, psychologists, and spiritual leaders as we explore how to navigate these painful times with wisdom and resilience, finding guidance for our own paths through this raw, unfiltered world. In this episode of Raw, I sit down with Polly Bronstein, a dynamic figure and CEO and founder of the 100 Initiative. Polly is also the author of the book How I Became a Moderate, A Journey from Left to Center, where she documents her personal and political evolution. In our conversation, Polly opens up about her experience as a young political activist, including a hunger strike she led in her early years, and shares the profound identity crisis she faced in 2015 following Benjamin Netanyahu's landslide victory. Once a staunch left-wing activist, Polly found herself compelled to understand the people who voted for Netanyahu: settlers, ultra-Orthodox, and others, leading her to embrace different perspectives and ultimately found an organization that aims to strengthen the moderate camp in Israel. We also delve into the benefits and dangers of staying within like-minded communities, discussing how being surrounded by those who share your views can provide both a sense of belonging and a risk of missing the truth. Join us as we explore Polly's journey from the political left to the center, her thoughts on the future of Israel, and her vision for a country that is reinvigorated and remoralized. This is an episode full of insights, ideal for anyone grappling with the complexities of Israeli politics or the power of personal transformation. Polly, welcome to Raw. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me.
Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor.
So I met you a couple of months ago. You came to one of my friends' homes to talk about your initiative. It was such a relief for me to hear someone talk about common ground in Israeli society. You gave a very interesting analogy of a pizza, and you talked about Israeli society being like a pizza where we can still find each other in the middle of the pizza. We can find a lot of common ground, but what is making it to the news and what is kind of being felt in our psyches and in our bodies these days is the kind of edges of the pizza, which is what differentiates us. And you're saying, let's bring the focus back to the middle and to the many, many, many things that we have in common. And it's a message that you hear so rarely these days. I think things are more polarized and divided and extreme than ever. even though to an extent, I think the war managed to temporarily quiet the deep-seated divisions in Israeli society, but it brought out other divisions, which is, Israelis against Palestinians and the way the world views the conflict many times in very black and white ways. So I'd love to hear from you. You started this initiative in 2015 to kind of bring Israeli society closer together. In the last year almost, since October 7th, our reality has changed drastically. How has that time affected the cohesion in Israeli society?
So, I know you spoke about the pizza, and I'm not sure that our listeners understood the metaphor. So let's kind of go into, first of all, pizza is like comfort food, right? It's carbs.
Yes.
So, I mean, good metaphor in that sense, because what we need right now is some comfort, right? And talking about the pizza is like it's like making Israel look like a whole pizza with slices that are different from each other. So you have a slice with onions and a slice with pineapple. That's my favorite, and so on. And the same way as Israel has a slice of Haredis, ultra-Orthodox, and a slice of Arabs, and a slice of settlers, and a slice of leftists, and so on. So looking at Israel like a pizza is a good metaphor, and I want to add that I come from a specific slice. Like originally, I have a slice, right? I'm secular. I'm Ashkenazi. I'm from Tel Aviv. I always voted left. So I come from a specific slice. But I think what happened to me about 10 years ago, and it happened out of a very big crisis that I went through, a political crisis. I ran a campaign. The campaign was in the elections in 2015, and it was designed to unseat Prime Minister Netanyahu. And the day after he won that election, and he won big, it was his biggest victory, I think, ever. That was about 10 years ago. I didn't understand how he won. I mean, all of my feed was telling me that we are winning. The people who are trying to unseat him and get a center-left government, the polls were showing that he's going to lose. My entire, universe was voting against him, and I didn't vote. I didn't know one person who voted for him. So if we go back to the metaphor of the pizza, I was living on my slice, and I didn't know anyone who was different than I was. And so, then it was March 18, 2015. Won't forget that day when I wake up in the morning, and we didn't just lose to Netanyahu. I mean, we lost big. And I was asking myself, who are all these people who voted for Netanyahu? Like, what's their rationale? What don't they understand about Israel and the world and so on? And I remember just literally taking a pencil and a notebook and saying, I'm gonna investigate this. Like, I'm gonna research what just happened. I'm gonna talk to people who voted for Netanyahu, and I literally made phone calls to journalists from the right and politicians from Likud, and went to the periphery of Israel, to the settlements where I never went before. And I just started listening and started asking questions about what happened. And it was very, very hard. Getting out of my slice in the pizza and starting walking around the pizza and learning the perspectives of other people in Israel. And I think, before we go on, I just want to say I recommend that to everyone. Just, get out of your bubble and listen with a real intent to understand. And just to end this part, people are not doing that because they are afraid, I think, of what they're going to hear, but they're also afraid to be influenced, that they will change. And so as a graduate of a journey like that, as a process that I've made, I can tell you, you do change. You do get influenced by others, but the positive side is that you get to influence other people. You get to change other people too. So if you're a person that wants to influence people and you want to convince them and you want to have a real conversation where people will hear you, you need to be ready to be changed and to listen, to be convinced. And that's a compromise. Not everyone will be willing to do something like that.
I used to teach a class about journalism, and one of the things that I used to talk about is that people used to get the newspaper, and that was one of their only sources of news. You had the newspaper, maybe you had the radio, and you had some television channels. And today it seems like you have so many more sources of information. You should be able to get so many more perspectives. But the thing with the newspaper is it's finite. You have the kind of first page and second page and 10th and 15th page. And it gave you a kind of overview of different things. If you were finished with the things that you were interested in reading and you had nothing else to read, you would go to an article about another country or a different perspective or an opinion piece. And you kind of took in, it was the same voice, it was the same newspaper. So criticisms, downsides to that as well, of course. But you took in a wider range of topics. And today, more than ever, in a way, despite this overwhelming amount of information sources that we have, we really live, like you explained already in 2015, in your own feed, in your social media feed, but also in your direct social circle. You only had access to one very specific way of thinking. And so the more that happens, the more it's also hard and difficult and painful to take in perspectives that don't match with that, because suddenly it feels like the world is completely different to what you thought. And that's a painful process to go through, just like you found it very painful when you woke up on that morning after the election.
In 30 years, media changed completely. Journalism changed completely. You can tell about almost like 90% of the journalists, you can tell who they're voting for, right? What camp are they representing? And then you see the data about which is the main TV channel that I get my information from. And so 67% of Netanyahu voters get it from channel 14. So that would be like Fox News, right? And 68% of Gantz's voters get their information from channel 12. It would be like, I don't know, MSNBC. So we are not getting the same facts, not the same headlines, not the same stories, not the same reality. We just live in different universes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more than the fact we live in kind of different emotional circles. So, if you're right wing, Channel 14 will really feed and reassure your kind of existential, emotional foundation of these people speak like me, they look like me, they think like me, they validate me. And so it's a very good positive feedback loop. If a right-wing person is going to look at Channel 12 or a left-wing person looks at Channel 14, it's very painful because it comes back to that idea of, wanting to stay in some ways in the echo chamber, in the bubble, consciously choosing not to take in other perspectives because it's just so painful and hard to do. So tell me a little bit about your journey when you went through, when you went to visit with these people who thought very differently to what you thought. How did you do it? Do you think it's your personality? Do you think you have a certain kind of defense against the pain of being othered and of realizing that the world doesn't think or have the same values as you? And what do you think is required in order to be able to take in different perspectives?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say, as I said before, I came from my own slice of the pizza, from my own tribe, and I was not a moderate, right? I was like, I'm a very opinionated person, fight for my beliefs. When I was like 20 something, I hunger stroke 11 days in front of the prime minister's chambers.
You did not eat pizza for 11 days?
Not pizza, no carbs, no fat, nothing, just just water. So I'm not a very moderate person. Just to understand, it's not a character thing. But sometimes people change out of big crises, right? Of very dark moments. And I had one in 2015. I was defeated. There's no other way around. And mind you, I was not defeated personally, right? I didn't run in 2015's elections. I was not out there to get chosen. It wasn't a personal thing, but it felt personal because my worldview and everything that I believed in, got beaten and won over. And I didn't, I was completely disoriented. I felt like I'm losing Israel. And so out of a very dark place, I went out, and I want to be very honest. When I came out, it was to understand what went wrong so we can win it next time, right? As I said, okay, let's get to know the enemy, how he thinks and what's his perspective, so we can use that so we can win next time. But I, did not expect to have the impact that it had on me. And I'll share two things with you that I think you and our listeners. The first thing I learned, which was, it will sound maybe obvious, but to me it was, mind blowing. Everyone in Israel, all the slices of the pizza, all the groups in Israel feel like they're losing. They're fighting to survive. Everyone is feeling like if they stop fighting, they will be crushed, right? Their rights will be taken away from them. Their way of life will be destroyed. And, people who find this obvious, I need to say that when I say to a person from the settlers, for example, that the people of the left, like the Tel Avivians, feel that they are afraid, that they're fighting for everything, for life and death, you would say, are you kidding? Why? They control everything, right? We keep winning elections, but they own the military, they own the media, they own the academia and the universities, they own everything else, like business, money. It's all theirs. They're the winners. They're the hegemony. But if you tell a leftist from Tel Aviv that the settlers feel like they're losing and that they're fighting for the communities to survive, you will say, hey, the settlers are winning, and they know that they're winning. They have all the control. They have all the money, the state budget, all the decision making. They're smart and they're aggressive. And it's very hard to explain that most of us come from a place of not just fear, trauma. So the settlers, for me, for someone who came from Tel Aviv, understanding that the disengagement that happened in 2005 in Israel, where 7,000 or 8,000 settlers were taken from their homes, and then their homes were destroyed to come out of Gaza, their communities were destroyed. And there were 7,000 or 8,000 settlers, but it was a very, very large group of hundreds of thousands of Israelis who were supporting them and did not believe that the state is doing that it's turning its back on them like that. Because, who sent the settlers to settle? The government, the Israeli government. And it wasn't just a right-wing government. It was the people that I voted for. So Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres, they all supported at the beginning the settlements. And people were sent there as pioneers in the name of the state. But on the other hand, people like me, if you scratch us, just a bit, you will get to the Rabin assassination. That's where our trauma begins, our fear of the aggressiveness of the right, the incitement, the fact that, we can win an election and then they can kill a prime minister. And I don't even need to talk about Arabs of Israel or the ultra-Orthodox, two societies that are so hated, right? There's so much hate towards them that they can feel it not just on politics, they can feel it on the street. And so that was my first insight, and it was very important. Everyone here acts out of fear and is fighting for everything and feel like they have nothing to lose already. And the second insight thing I learned from this journey, which is a bit sometimes harder for me to explain, is that nobody holds a monopoly on the truth. So when you go to the settlements, you hear important information and facts and ideas. And if you're not listening, you're losing a part of the truth. If you're not going to the Arab towns of Israel and listen to the Arabs of Israel, you are losing part of reality in Israel. You are blind. And if you're not listening to the leftists, and if you're not listening to the ultra and so on, people here stop listening to each other, but the truth lies with, the voice of everyone around the table. And to explain blindness and how dangerous it is, we just need to look at October 7th. October 7th is a classic event of blindness, where you had there was one set of glasses to look at reality, right? We were looking at our security situation through a lens, and we refused to pass on through that filter any information that contradicted what we thought was the truth. And fact did not even go through. And we were attacked, and we had the most, horrible, biblical destruction in our, since we were born, the state. That's an event of blindness. And so now I understand nobody here is completely right. Nobody's 100% right. When we don't listen, we do not see reality as it is. I want a table of decision making that has representatives from all slices. By the way, not the radical parts, not the extreme parts of every triangle or every size, right? I don't want Ben Gvir around the table. And I don't want, a representative from Balad party and a very, very nationalistic Palestinian party in Israel. But I want Arabs around the table, and I want settlers around the table, and I want me and my colleagues around the table. All of us need to be part of decision making and the narrative.
I think in order to take in different perspectives, you need to have compassion. Or maybe naturally, when you meet someone from other slices of the pizza, and when you meet them in the flesh, you kind of naturally, in most cases, if there are one-on-one interactions, let's say, I could meet people in the settlements, in Arab towns, in, Arabs who identify as Palestinians, ultra-Orthodox, and we would probably have, in most cases, the ability to share something human around a table of food and humor and common history, because there is so much that we share. But in order to do that, I need to have access to these people. And that's what I always find so troubling and interesting about Israel, is that even though it's such a small country and it is a country of immigrants from all over the world, there is this sense that I have that people really stay within their little bubbles, within their little bubbles on the slice of pizza, not even, the general slice. And I always give this example of Tel Aviv, which is where I'm from. There's Tel Aviv in the old north where I live, and there's, the Tel Avivians who live in Florentine and in Jaffa. And there is such an identification with where you come from and the people who surround you. And go to most places in Israel, people are surrounded primarily with people who think and vote and look like them. So how do you bridge those divides when people hardly even meet, other than in the news and, TikTok, etc., and there is so little interaction other than perhaps in hospitals when you go and in many cases your nurse or your doctor is from, the periphery or is Arab, Israeli, etc.
I remember a few years back, the Pew Institution in America, he ran a very, very big study here in Israel and interviewed, 5,000 Israelis from all sorts and kinds. Super interesting. They had loads of data and information out of that study, but one of them showed that all of us, all the slices of the pizza have 90%, 95% friends who are exactly like us. So it's not just, we used to think that ultra-Orthodox have this big, big wall, and they do. By the way, they do have a big wall that they put deliberately because they want to defend themselves from outside influence. So you would say, yeah, obviously ultra-Orthodox have only friends that are ultra-Orthodox. But it's not just them. It's all of us. And more than that, think about where it starts. So Israeli education system is divided to 4 streams. So we send our kids to either a secular, kind of a sacred and Masorti, right, a traditional stream, a religious stream, a ultra-Orthodox stream, and an Arab stream. So our kids do not meet kids that are different than theirs. This is even in cities that are mixed. Cities, right? In Tel Aviv, Yafo, in Yafo, for example, Jews and Arabs live in the same neighborhoods, but they don't go to the same school. So they don't meet each other at school. And as you said, we don't read the same, media channels and newspapers and so on. So if you're not active in finding friends that are different than yours, you live in a bubble. Like you're blind, mister. I mean, when I came out and did this journey that I wrote a book about, it's exactly what you said. Part of why it was so powerful is that I made friends, real friends. One of them, for example, became one of my best friends. Like, years have passed and we still talk almost every day. And we sometimes scream at each other, but we do holidays together and we went abroad together. Like the families became very close. And my friend, Esther, she's called Esther and she lives in a settlement called Ofra. She would be someone that in my previous life, I would have so much, wrong
judgments.
Bias against her, right? Here, still my friends will have, if they see her on the street with her head covered the way it is and so on, they will assume a lot of things about her that are not true. Some of them are true, and the other way around. And since we became friends, her and I, first of all, we did a lot of things together, a lot of projects and initiatives, and I came to speak to her community, and she came to speak to mine, and so on. So we're trying to use our friendship to influence as many people as possible. But I use her every day to understand things that blow my mind here, and say, how can they still support Netanyahu, or how can they still think that? So I will call her and she will explain. And in most cases, I will not agree, but I will understand. I will understand the rationale. I will see these are not bad people. They were brought up on different ethoses sometimes, Here's an interesting thing, a philosophical thing. What's the difference between a moderate and an extremist? Because Estelle, my friend, and I were moderates, although we are from different groups, different slices. And both of them we're not the extremes on our slices. So what makes the difference between us and our extremes? I think I heard Dr. Micha Goodman speak about that. An extremist doesn't have just one value, right? It does have a set of values in his life, right? He can keep a few. But an extremist has one value that is more important than all the rest. And when values like they do, that's what their tendency is to come in contradiction with each other or in tension with each other in your life. The extremist will always choose this one value that is, is in the hierarchy, he's like the most important one. And a moderate also has a set of values, many values, but it doesn't have one that all the rest, submit to. He sometimes will, choose this one and one time the other. So, for example, freedom and equality are two values that are very important and they are in tension in Israel all the time. And a moderate will sometimes say, you know what, in this case, I go with freedom. But in this case, I go with equality. And I find people like that who are pragmatic and moderate and that I can talk to on all slices. I would say most of Israelis are moderates, but we don't hear them because they're moderates. So they're quiet.
Taking in a lot of perspectives requires a psychology that is malleable, that is flexible, like you said, when, we can hold a set of values as important, but we are able to kind of move within that a little bit more flexibly. What do you think are some of the things that need to be done, that need to be fostered here in Israel in order to create a society where more people are able to take in a wider range of perspectives and understand them, even if, like you said, not necessarily agree with them, but understand that the other slices of pizza are not some, cardboard or alien creatures that are completely different to you. They're humans, and they have their own very unique history that made them believe the things that they believe. What are the things that are needed in order to create that change? Does it start in childhood and education? What are some of the tools that you are proposing that will allow people to take in more perspectives with greater ease and comfort, and not feel so threatened when they hear a perspective that doesn't fully match their own?
Right. So that's the holy grail. How do you strengthen moderation and centrism and so on? So we built an organization about 3 years ago. It's called the 100 Initiative, and it's very influenced by tech because a lot of high-tech entrepreneurs in Israel were involved in building it. And one of the things that they taught me is that in the tech world, in the tech industry, when you come to sell your product or your company, your startup to investors, you need to start with what is the problem that you want to fix. So what are you addressing? What's the problem? And I will argue that the problem right now that we're trying to address in the 100 Initiative is the weakness of the center. So we think that the center is the most important engine or the most important ideological camp and political camp in Israel, and it's the only one who can take us out of the mess that we are in, this very big crisis. And the problem is that it's hollow, it's shallow. I have a friend who was a journalist who says, the right in Israel became, populist and extreme and crazy. The left have become irrelevant, and the center, which is the most important, is hollow. It sits on nothing. And so what is the mission? The mission is strengthening the center. And when you ask yourself what will give it muscles, what will give it like the fat that it needs to become big and strong? So first of all, leadership, fostering leadership that sees itself as centrist and understands what the DNA of centrism and speaks the language of centrism and moderation and pragmatic language with pride, not as a compromise, not as a, what can we do? We need to, we're trying to, let them agree on something. No, as its own paradigm, as its independent way of thinking. So we need language and we need concepts, and then we need leadership that will use it and lead it. We need policies. We need good plans. What is the center gonna lead? Where is it gonna lead us? In education, in economics, in state budget, in security, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What is its plan? So working on the plans and the policies of the center, and you said it right, education. We need to start with the young generation, formal education, informal education, asking ourselves what is the values, and the identity of the mainstream Israeli. And of course, we're fighting two things. First of all, we're fighting the Israeli notion. Maybe it's not just an Israeli thing, I don't know. But for sure here, that being a centrist is having no opinion, having no spine, not knowing who you are, just wanting everyone to like you and want everyone to get along. And that's one thing that we need to fight. No, it's an opinion. It's actually a very, assertive way of thinking. And second is, we're fighting a machine of a lot of people, thousands of people will get, their salaries. They wake up in the morning, every morning, making sure that we continue to fight and we continue to hate and we continue to be divided to two groups, because there's a lot of people, politicians and others, that are gaining from division. They're gaining from the hate, from chaos. And so we have to be very productive. We have to build leadership, build language, build policies, build ideas, but we also need to fight. We have to fight our image, and we need to fight the toxic machine. And yeah, it's hard, but we will win. You wanted to be hopeful.
You've been doing this for closing on a decade in a year and a half or
Yeah.
so. How much hope do you have left? How much fight do you have left in you? And do you sometimes think, it's hopeless, or, are you sometimes pessimistic that this society is just too divided to kind of come back to its middle ground, to kind of common values?
So I'm very, very worried and sad, sometimes depressed, really, because the reality is so, so hard. Now, our politics is devastating. It's horrible. But I want to be forgiving towards Israel because I see the same in all the countries around us. The liberal democracy is going through a crisis everywhere. The United States is the best example. And so Israel is part of a global problem and a global crisis. And actually, I think we're dealing with it. I'm very proud of how Israelis are fighting the undemocratic trends and how our democracy is still in such a crazy crisis. It's so strong, and we're so democratic as people. I'm not naive. I know that there is a scenario that we stop being who we are. I can see that. Like I can see the scenario that brings us and we become like our biggest fears. I can absolutely see that. It's a real scenario. Like it can happen. But since in my mind I can still see the good scenario and I live it, I work on it with people around me that are amazing from all sorts and kinds. That's why I'm optimistic and I believe. And I have a lot of hope for Israel.
As we're speaking, and I want to go back to when you first had that kind of political, social, cultural awakening in 2015, and you started meeting with different spheres of society, and you kind of opened up, and you were able to take in many different perspectives and to humanize many different perspectives, to put faces and real tears and blood humans. One other thing that also really strikes me in Israel, and in some ways it makes sense in times of war, but also in general, is that, we have these other people who live, at our borders. I'm referring to Palestinians who in the West Bank, we control their movement, their finances to an extent. And, in Gaza, we are now at war with and bombing. And, Israelis will argue that Israel has achieved many things. No one can argue with the fact that also, tens of thousands of Palestinians have died. One of the things that I find striking in Israel is how little in the news you even see, you even hear of, you even conceptualize the life of Palestinians, and the many different slices of pizza that they sit in, the many different backgrounds and kind of affiliations and ways of thinking. And it really, for example, it recently really surprised me to understand to how big this section of Palestinians who are in some ways much more secular than religious. They really don't have this kind of fanatical Islamist fundamentalist worldview. They're much more secular. It's nuanced. So I'm wondering, as someone who has worked on making friends in different spheres of society and taking in different ideas, have you also been willing to take on Palestinian narratives? There is not one, there are many. Or is that kind of like a wall that you, maybe like many, many, many Israelis, have put up for many different, psychological, moral, ideological, and just pragmatic reasons?
It's such a difficult question, because the answers are very difficult. They're difficult for me. I come from the left. I come from the peace camp. And for many years, I'm almost 50 years old. And so I lived through, a lot of what has gone through the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So first the Oslo Accord, and the Rabin assassination and the disengagement. And I've been through a lot. I've seen a lot. And I worked as part of the peace camp. I was head of a movement called One Voice. And One Voice was a movement. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was a movement that existed in Israel and in the Palestinian Authority. And it was called One Voice because it was about Israelis and Palestinians speaking in one voice for a two-state solution. And I remember it was so hard because Israel did have a peace camp, right? And you could talk about wanting peace and a two-state solution, but our counterparts in the Palestinian Authority, they needed to hide. We would invite them here to Israel and they will come, but they will hide. And they will say, don't post our photos on Facebook and so on. Like we can't. People in what they call Palestine wouldn't know that they are supporters of a two-state solution or that they would come to Tel Aviv and meet their Israeli friends because people could get violence towards them for being peace supporting and two-state solution supporters. So I remember one of the things that struck me is that there's no peace Palestinian movement, right? And I think that was one of the things that disillusioned after many, many, many years, dozens of years, that the Israelis were advocating, a lot of Israelis, like half the country at least. Rabin won big on a peace agenda. One of the things I think that disillusioned the Israeli peace camp is that there was no counterpart on the Palestinian side. It's not to say that the individual Palestinians are not, as you said, I have Palestinian friends, and I know they want peace, and I know they hate Hamas, and I know they want a good life for themselves. And they're not shaheed, and they're not extreme at all. So I know that they exist. The problem is not with the individual Palestinians, it's with the ethos of the Palestinian movement. And I want to be, as a centrist, I want to tell you, it's going back to what we said before about having many values. It's hard. It's hard because being moral is also making sure that your children and your communities and your people will never, ever go through what we went on October 7th again. And at the same time, being moral is not, hurt many, many, many innocent people. So I would say, in that sense, that the most important thing is to keep Israel and Israelis and Jews of Israel, first of all, as you said, not to allow delegitimization of our Arab citizens. That's the people who are closest to us. You said it before, and you said it very nice. They are our doctors. They are our partners. They are our neighbors. We eat at the same restaurants. We shop at the same stores. We go to the same hospital. And I would say that even in war, the Israeli Arabs of Israel acted since October 7th in such a dignified manner. They were so restrained. They tried so hard to keep their emotions exactly, to themselves. Although they were suffering from what was happening to their people in Gaza, we need to look at our citizens who are Arab and be as fair as we can towards them, and to teach our children to not be biased against them, and to delegitimize our leaders and our politicians that use incitement and hatred towards our Arab Israeli citizens, and push back on that. So we know what is our moral ground and who we are, without, again, losing our understanding to our narrative.
What keeps you going? What are the practices that you have in your life, or who inspires you? Who gives you strength? Is it, historical figures? Is it practices that you do foster a kind of healthy psyche and emotional life, and to have that strong backbone that is needed to do any kind of political social work in Israel these days?
So I used to feel that I'm a political homeless or a social homeless. I felt so alone when I felt that I'm no longer part of the left camp of Israel because I became, more moderate and more pragmatic, but I for sure was not part of the right-wing camp, never got to be right-wing. I had no home and no place that I felt that I can take my guard down. I was fighting everyone, and everyone was fighting me. In a way, I'm still in a position where, I keep getting heat from left and right, but now I feel that I have a camp. Now I feel what I've done in these past years in this journey is to find people like me. And where do I find inspiration and peace of mind is with like-minded people. But in order to find like-minded people, I had to be very active, as I told you. I had to go and look for my colleagues and my friends. The 100 Initiative gives me a lot of comfort. It was the organization that I've built by seriously like going out there and finding the government official and the journalist and the high-tech entrepreneur, and I brought them from all sorts and parts of society and the working force, people who felt like me that the most important thing is to build a strong center. And now that I have this group, and more groups were founded, and movements and organizations, and Israel is now has a field, an ecosystem full of organizations that feel the same as we do, and leaders like that. And that gives me a lot of comfort. Having face-to-face conversations and phone conversation with your friends, and expanding the variety of friends and colleagues that you have, finding the movement or the organization that you're active in and you're being part of, being active about shaping what surrounds you. I think it will help you feel more optimistic and hopeful. And also it will help Israel, will help the world.
I think that's something to remember as well, is that for human beings, in order to have a healthy psychology, we need both. We need the tribe where we feel safe and we can be fully ourselves, and we recognize each other's values and histories and ways of speaking and ways of eating. And in some ways, that's what I love about Israel, is that having come to live here and my children grew up here, and, like I said, this North Tel Aviv bubble that I'm in, the beautiful part is that my children feel like everyone is family, because to an extent, it's not utopia, but there are very similar values where I live, and there's beauty in that. There's beauty in being able to, your children going into another home and recognizing the ways of being, the ways of thinking about religion, about smartphones, about, things that are important to us. At the same time, if retreat into that tribe too much, especially in times when we feel threatened, that's the kind of natural human primitive reaction, is to retreat into our tribe. We lose the ability to see the full truth. And so there's the both, the both, and the kind of safety of the tribe, and at the same time having enough courage to sometimes, peek with our head outside and see what's happening, to read different news websites. 90% of the time, fine, read or go to the channel that you feel comfortable with, but have that awareness that you need to sometimes take in other perspectives, even the ones that are very painful. And I think in order to do that, and that's something also that I discuss a lot on the podcast, is you need a strong, healthy psychology. In order to take in different perspectives, you need to feel safe, you need to feel secure. And so you need to have a tribe that supports you. You need to have good mental health practices. You need to take care of yourself. And so, yeah, that's I'd love to hear if you kind of generally agree with that.
I think you made an amazing point. It's an excellent point. It's you don't know, but you made a centrist point.
A centrist point.
Because the center believes that it's this and that, right? It's not this or that, it's this and that. And what you're saying is, on one hand, we need a glue that will hold everything together, right? We need an identity that is shared by most of us, and symbols that we can identify, rules of the game that we can agree on, like, right? Or we collapse, right? It just dismantles. But on the other side, we want our community and we want our story, we want our narrative, we want our kids to grow up with who we are, our sector. We also want to be sectorial and we want to be communal. The 100 Initiative came up with a model, an operating model, that I think takes what you very intuitively, very beautifully articulated as a person, takes that and makes it into an operating system for Israel. So what we say is, we need to decide what is the 50% that is common for everyone. The budget, where we have a budget that is national, where we do decision making together. So, for example, things like foreign policy and security and our national symbols and ceremonies, and 50% of the curriculum in school will be joined for everyone, despite the fact that we have 4 different streams and so on. But we need to give 30% of decision making, of the responsibilities of the budget, to give it to the different sectors or to the municipality, the city. And then 20%, exactly as you said, let the people have it for their community, for their school, for their youth movement, their neighborhood, to decide what do we want to give our children, what do we want to teach, what kind of religious practices we want in our neighborhood, and so on. So if you take the 50-30-20 operating system and you implement it on education, and you implement it on religion and state issues, you take a lot of the tension out, and you still keep a layer that is joined by most of the Israelis. And I say most because it will never be 100%, right? And so I totally agree with what you said, and I feel the same way. I grew up thinking that 100% of Israel can be identical, that we can all fit in, one model of what is Israel and what it is to be Israeli. And, my parents came from Mexico. I had an accent. I had a strong Mexican accent, and I lost it deliberately because I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be like everyone else, fit this Israeli model of, having the right tan and being an officer in the Israeli army and, wiping hummus with pita. And the truth is, we lost a lot of beauty and nuances and stories and narratives of Jews that came from places around the world by trying to fit one mold. And so I think even in a very practical manner, Israel needs to keep what it can for all of us together, or most of us together, and let a lot of the responsibilities and budgets and decision-making to the people. People know what they need and what they want, and they will probably make good decisions.
This country is so complex and so hard and so beautiful in some ways to live in that it's, for many people, it's inevitable to think sometimes, what would I be, where would I be if I weren't here? Do you ever have those dreams of escaping?
I'll tell you something. If the bad scenario happens and my kids end up somewhere else, I'm not going to be on the boat. I have nowhere to go. This is my country. If I need, I will fight from the trenches. This is my home. So, and I call upon all my Israeli friends, don't leave. Don't leave. We're going to fix it, but we're only going to fix it if we do it together. It's ours. We don't have another place. Nowhere. There's beautiful places around the world, but none of them is home. I lived in London for 4 years. I loved London. I loved it. We had the most marvelous time there, but mainly because we were guests. And this is the only home we have, anyway, for me. And thank you for asking that. And if you live abroad, consider coming back and being part of the, Zionist revolution in the best way possible. I think we can come out of this so much stronger and better. Really.
Polly, thank you so much for speaking with me, and I wish you to continue to embody the strength which you so clearly have. I wish you continued strength, courage, and to be guided by your moral compasses.
It was a great conversation. Thank you so much. It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This has been Raw. To listen to more of our episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. I'm Anouk Glory. Goodbye.